Vince McMahon names 4 players. He absolutely hated Vince McMahon. Once revealed the 4 wrestlers he absolutely couldn't stand, and trust me, each name comes with some wild stories. So without wasting any time, let's jump right in and see what really went down. 1. Bret Hart. It all really began in 1997, a year that changed professional wrestling forever. Bret Hart had been one of Vince McMahon's most loyal and dependable stars for over a decade. He wasn't just the face of WWF, he was the company's moral backbone. But by the late 90s, things started to shift. The wrestling world was getting edgier, wilder, and more competitive thanks to WCW. Vince was desperate to keep his company alive, and the business side of things began to clash with Bret's loyalty and values. At the time, Bret had just signed a massive 20-year deal with WWF, something unheard of back then. But not long after, Vince told him the company couldn't afford to honor it. He actually encouraged Bret to go negotiate with WCW, his biggest rival. Imagine that, your boss telling you to go join the competition. Bret was hesitant, but eventually he agreed to leave once his contract ended. The only problem? He was still the WWF champion. Vince didn't want Bret walking into WCW with his company's title. Bret, on the other hand, refused to lose the belt in his home country of Canada, especially to someone like Shawn Michaels, a man he had real-life tension with. This created a nightmare scenario. Vince feared that if Bret left as champion, it would make him and WWF look weak. So behind Bret's back, Vince came up with a plan. The infamous Montreal screwjob took place on November 9, 1997, at Survivor Series in Montreal. During the match between Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels, Bret thought the finish was going as planned, a disqualification ending that would protect his title for one more night. But midway through the match, Shawn locked Bret in his own finishing move, the sharpshooter. And then, without Bret tapping out, Vince ordered the referee to ring the bell. The match was over. Bret had been robbed of his title, live on pay-per-view, in front of his home crowd. The moment was chaos. Bret spit in Vince's face, trashed the ringside area, and stormed to the back where he later punched Vince square in the jaw. The hatred between them was real and raw. Lawsuits followed, words were exchanged in the media, and Vince's public image as a ruthless, manipulative boss only grew stronger, something he would later use to fuel his Mr. McMahon character on TV. For years, they refused to speak. The betrayal had cut too deep. But time has a strange way of healing things. Over a decade later, in 2010, Bret finally returned to WWE. The two shook hands on live television, officially putting an end to their long-running war. Still, no one ever forgot what happened in Montreal. It wasn't just a storyline, it was one of the most real, emotional, and unforgettable moments in wrestling history. 2. CM Punk. CM Punk's rise in WWE was anything but typical. He wasn't the kind of guy Vince McMahon usually saw as a top guy. He didn't have the bodybuilder look or the Hollywood-style charm Vince loved to market. But what Punk had was raw passion, sharp intelligence, and the ability to connect with fans in a real, unfiltered way. By 2011, when Punk dropped his now famous pipe bomb promo, he wasn't just playing a character. He was saying everything many wrestlers and fans had felt for years. He called out Vince, his family, and the entire WWE system for being out of touch. Ironically, that brutal honesty made him more popular than ever. For a while, Vince and Punk managed to make it work. Punk became WWE champion, headlined pay-per-views, and brought back a sense of unpredictability the company had been missing. But behind the scenes, tension never really went away. Punk often felt underappreciated, creatively restricted, and physically burned out. He wanted to be treated like the top guy he had earned the right to be. But Vince continued to favor the company's chosen faces like John Cena or part-timers like The Rock. By 2014, everything boiled over. Punk was hurt, mentally drained, and sick of the company's politics. He complained about being overworked and ignored when it came to his health, especially after a severe staph infection went untreated. He wasn't cleared to wrestle, yet he was pressured to perform. For Punk, that was the last straw. After the Royal Rumble that year, Punk walked out of WWE, just like that. No farewell speech, no official send-off. He simply left and never came back. For Vince McMahon, who prided himself on control and loyalty, it was a personal insult. Vince saw Punk's departure as ungrateful and disrespectful after all the opportunities he'd been given. But for Punk, it was about self-respect and survival. The situation only worsened when Punk went public. In a tell-all interview on his friend Colt Cabana's podcast, Punk exposed everything, from medical negligence to creative frustration. He accused Vince and WWE's doctors of endangering his health and criticized how the company treated its talent. It was explosive, and WWE didn't take it lightly. The company eventually fired him, by mail, on his wedding day no less. Punk later said that moment confirmed everything he already believed about Vince and WWE. Legal battles followed, especially with WWE's doctor, Chris Amann, who sued Punk and Cabana for defamation. Although Punk won the case, the relationship between him and Vince was beyond repair. Vince later said he was sorry things ended that way, but the damage had been done. Punk had become one of the few wrestlers Vince could never fully control, and that's exactly why Vince McMahon hated him. Even when Punk shockingly returned to WWE programming years later, fans could still feel that underlying tension. 3. The Ultimate Warrior. At one point, Vince saw Warrior as the next big thing, the man who could replace Hulk Hogan as the face of the WWF. But what started as a dream partnership quickly turned into one of the most toxic relationships in wrestling history, filled with money disputes, walkouts, lawsuits, and years of resentment on both sides. When the Ultimate Warrior first burst onto the scene in the late 1980s, Vince was immediately drawn to him. Warrior was everything Vince loved in a superstar. He was larger than life, intense, colorful, and had a physique that looked straight out of a comic book. Fans went crazy for him. By 1990, Vince had pushed him all the way to the top, even giving him the honor of defeating Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 6. It was meant to be a passing of the torch, a sign that Warrior was now the guy. But behind the paint and energy, things were messy. Warrior wasn't easy to work with. He constantly clashed with Vince over creative control, money, and his schedule. He felt that since he was now the company's top star, he deserved the same pay and treatment as Hogan. Vince, on the other hand, thought Warrior didn't understand how the business worked and saw his demands as ungrateful. Things hit a breaking point in 1991. Right before SummerSlam, Warrior sent Vince a letter demanding a massive payout, hundreds of thousands of dollars, or he wouldn't perform. It was pure extortion in Vince's eyes. Vince, not wanting to ruin the event, reluctantly agreed to pay him. But the moment the show ended, he suspended Warrior. To Vince, that was unforgivable. He felt betrayed, and that betrayal planted a deep seed of hatred that would last for years. Warrior did return briefly in 1992, but nothing had really changed. There were still creative disagreements and trust issues. Then once again, Warrior walked out. To Vince, that confirmed what he already believed, that Warrior was unreliable and only cared about himself. The two wouldn't work together again for nearly a decade. In the mid-90s, Warrior and Vince clashed again in court over the rights to the Ultimate Warrior name and image. The legal battles only added fuel to the fire. By this point, Vince's dislike for him was so strong that WWE even produced a documentary in 2005 called The Self-Destruction of the Ultimate Warrior. It painted Warrior as egotistical, erratic, and impossible to work with. Many saw it as Vince's way of getting the last word. But as wild as it sounds, the story didn't end there. In 2014, after nearly 2 decades of bitterness, Warrior and Vince finally reconciled. WWE inducted him into the Hall of Fame, and the two men shared an emotional moment backstage. Sadly, just days later, Warrior passed away suddenly. 4. Macho Man. Randy Savage. For years, fans have wondered why Vince, who once trusted Savage as one of his biggest stars, completely cut ties with him for nearly 2 decades. Their relationship started strong, full of respect and business success, but ended with silence, distance, and more speculation than any other fallout in wrestling history. Back in the late 1980s and early 90s, Randy Savage wasn't just another wrestler. He was one of Vince's most valuable performers. From his unforgettable matches with Ricky Steamboat to his legendary partnership with Miss Elizabeth, Savage was pure box office gold. Vince relied on him to carry the company when Hulk Hogan took time off, and Savage delivered every single time. He was intense, charismatic, and completely unique. But behind that energy was a man who was notoriously protective, demanding, and difficult to manage. As the WWF transitioned into the early 90s, Vince began moving in a different direction. He wanted younger stars, new faces, and a fresh image for the company. Savage, meanwhile, still wanted to wrestle full-time, but Vince was trying to move him toward a commentary role. That difference in vision created the first cracks in their relationship. Savage felt he still had plenty left in the tank, while Vince thought his time as an in-ring performer was winding down. Then came the moment that truly shattered things. Savage's decision to join WCW in 1994. According to many who were around at the time, Savage had personally told Vince that he would never work for Ted Turner's promotion. So when he suddenly appeared on WCW Saturday Night, Vince was completely blindsided. It wasn't just that Savage had left, it was that he'd done it without warning. For Vince McMahon, loyalty meant everything. And in his eyes, Savage had broken that loyalty in the worst way possible. After that, Vince seemed to erase Savage from WWE history altogether. For years, Savage wasn't mentioned on television, not included in highlight packages, and completely ignored in official retrospectives. Fans noticed, and so did other wrestlers. Something deeper was clearly going on. Over the years, wild rumors began to spread about the real reason behind their falling out. The most infamous of them involved Vince's daughter, Stephanie McMahon. However, it's important to note that this story was never proven, and no credible source ever confirmed it. Still, the rumor spread so widely that it became part of wrestling folklore, often used to explain why Vince refused to bring Savage back. Whether true or not, it only added another layer of mystery to their already complicated history. It wasn't until 2015, years after Savage's tragic death in 2011, that WWE finally inducted him into the Hall of Fame. By then, Vince had seemingly made peace with his memory, but the personal tension between them was never resolved face-to-face. And that's a wrap for today's video. Don't forget to drop a like, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye.